Hey guys, Pastor Tanner here. I have a saying that I'm very fond of, and that is this. It's not an either or, but a both and. In fact, I say this so often that some of our viewers over on Twitch like to constantly make fun of me because I'm always saying it's a both and. Is this just one of those both and scenarios, Pastor Tanner? Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because we've done a few videos on this topic. I call it Paradox in Christian Theology, but some of those videos are longer and they're older and they're a little bit more in-depth. I found a chapter in a book I was reading by Anthony Hoekema that summarizes this concept very clearly and easily. And so when I came across it, I felt like I had to share it with you guys. Let's take a look. Now, this book is called Created in God's Image, okay, by Anthony Hoekema. It's an older work, but it's excellent. And here in chapter 2, Hoekema talks about exactly what I'm trying to get at, this both and mentality. If you can understand both ands within Christianity, it's going to help you so much in understanding doctrine and theology. I want you to know that many fights among Christians over certain doctrines are often a failure to recognize the both and concepts in Scripture. Instead, we are either oring things and then we're fighting against each other within a dualistic frame. I think Christianity teaches us to ascend the dualistic frame and instead have this understanding of the both and I actually think Christ is the prototypical example of that. Now, let's go ahead and jump into what Hoekema says, and I'll describe a little bit further. Hoekema says this. He says, "This is the central mystery of man. How can man be both a creature and a person at the same time? To be a creature, as we have seen, means absolute dependence on God. To be a person means relative independence. How can these things both be true at the same time?" asks Hoekema. Listen to what else he says. He says, "I have called this the central mystery of man because to us it seems deeply mysterious that man can be both a creature and a person at the same time. Dependence and freedom seem to us to be incompatible concepts." This is key because he's actually going to use this understanding of the both and when it comes to human nature to help us to resolve many biblical doctrines that are in tension. And he just does these rapid fire. I think this is 10 pages, this short little chapter, and he goes in depth into all of these doctrines. But I want you to understand the overarching doctrine that points to this for us as Christians is the doctrine of the incarnation. Jesus is both 100% man and 100% God. And it's actually this in-depth doctrine as it's discussed that helps us to understand the both and mentality. We don't actually commingle or co-mix the nature of Christ. We don't say he's 50% man, 50% God. We don't try to mix it all up and put it in some sort of weird category. Instead, we just affirm the paradox on its face. Jesus is 100% man, he's 100% God. It's a bit of a mystery to us. This is not a bug within Christian theology. It's actually a feature because this teaches us to ascend past the dualistic frame of mind and actually into a more comprehensive, unified mentality. And here we see in the image of man that exact same pattern represented. Once you see this pattern in the scriptures, you're not going to be able to miss it. It pops up everywhere. Let's look at what Hoekema has to say. He says, "Though we cannot rationally comprehend how it is possible for the human being to be both a creature and a person at the same time, clearly this is what we must think." He's saying the Bible teaches it. We have to affirm it. "Denial of either side of this paradox will fail to do justice to the biblical picture. The Bible teaches both man's creatureliness and man's personhood." Listen to the affirmation that this is a paradox. I've talked about this before. James Anderson, Paradox in Christian Theology. Such a good book, and it talks about this fact. This is not a bug in Christian theology. It is a feature. This reconciliation of paradoxes is actually one of the cornerstones of Christian theology and one of the central affirmations, I think, of why Christianity is true. Okay? This is key, and we have to grasp it. Let's keep reading. Hoekema says, "Our theological understanding of man must, therefore, keep both of these truths clearly in focus. Maintain the tension. Don't try to subsume either one, okay? Not intermixed, not intermingled. All secular anthropologies fail to take into account human creatureliness and therefore give a distorted view of man." He goes on to talk about the fact that you can emphasize one to the exclusion of the other. Some philosophies or anthropologies like to emphasize man's creatureliness. They end up losing something. Okay? Other philosophies like to emphasize the fact that man is in charge, and they end up losing something. It's holding both of these in tension that allows us to embrace the fullness of our humanity. Let's look at how Hoekema applies this same structure or pattern to many different biblical doctrines. I think this is where this insight has so much for us as Christians. The first one he points out is this. What light does this concept shed on the question of the origin of sin? Have you ever gotten into that conversation with people? Where did sin come from? Did God create it? Did man create it? Why were we allowed to sin? Why were we allowed to fall? Why did God give us free will? All of these questions, okay? Hoekema says, in this issue, we are running into our same tension. Okay, man is both these things at the same time. He says, we grant the reason that man sinned will always remain an unfathomable mystery, and yet this is something that we can put together. Secondly, look at this other doctrine he points out. What light does this concept of the created person shed on the way in which God redeems man? We're looking at the fact that God redeems man. How can we understand God's redemption of man from this creatureliness and personhood distinction? Oh, we continue to hold the tension. He talks about the fact that man is not saved like a robot whose activities have been programmed by some celestial computer, okay? And the fact that we are a person implies that we have an important role to play in redemption. That's something we do. He continues, as an illustration to this point, let us consider how regeneration is related to faith. Regeneration is a work of God. Faith is a work of man in which we respond to the regenerative work of God. And he says these things are held in tension. Have you ever gotten into fights or conversations between Calvinists and Arminians? Is this 100% God? Is it 100% man? Is it co-mixed, commingled, etc.? I have made clear on this channel that I'm a Calvinist. I hold to those doctrines of grace. But the fact of the matter is that this is yet another tension. If you can understand and hold the paradoxes in Scripture, we can stop getting into all of these either-or fights over so many theological doctrines and instead embrace the both and. Let's continue. He says, a further illustration of this point. Let us look at the process of sanctification. One of my favorite passages for this comes from Philippians 2:12 and 13. He quotes it right here. Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now, not only as in my presence, but also much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. The personhood. You are responsible to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Personhood. But notice how the Scriptures hold the tension. Paul understood this. Verse 13, for it is God who works in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. Creatureliness. Creatureliness says, God works in me. Personhood says, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. What the Scriptures put together, man should not be separating. And yet we constantly do this. Is sanctification your work or is it God's work? And we get in all of these theological fights because we fail to embrace the paradox, okay? The paradox is a feature, not a bug. Let's continue. Hoekema says, this same principle holds for the doctrine of the perseverance of the saints. In the perseverance of the saints, we understand that God preserves us until the end. This is something he actively does. We just participate in the fact that God preserves us. Creatureliness. We're entirely dependent on him. And yet, perseverance is something completely tied with preservation. Perseverance means I have to persevere. I have to finish the race. I have to work until the end. And that looks a whole lot like personhood, something I am doing. We hold it in tension. We do not have to create an either or where the Scripture makes it a both and. This happens over and over and over again. Finally, just one more. The understanding of man as a created person helps us to answer the much debated question of whether the covenant of grace is conditional or unconditional. And you know what Hoekema is going to do. He's going to say it's a both and, not an either or. I was so surprised to find in this little work, created in God's image, been out for a long time, by Anthony Hoekema, such a straightforward declaration of this essential understanding of paradox within Christian theology. So there you go, guys. I wanted to present this to you because I think it is so essential for the church in our day and age to understand this concept. We should hold the paradox in tension. Jesus is our biblical example for this. He's 100% man and 100% God. He sets the pattern. He sets the framework. And then we can embrace this wherever we find it in Scripture. It's not all about creating either ors. Instead, it's about creating both and. ands. Now, I don't want you to take this the wrong way. I'm not saying that anywhere that there's issues within Christian theology or disagreements, we can just both and everything. No, I'm not taking full postmodernism with this and saying it's no big deal. We can just have truth for you and it doesn't matter. That's not what I'm saying, guys. Please hear me. I am saying that there are many doctrines in the Bible that we are taught to hold in tension. These are a paradox, and this is a feature, not a bug. And the sooner Christians can grasp this, the sooner we are going to be prepared to preach the gospel to a postmodern culture, because we recognize this distinction, and it's there in Scripture itself. For many years, we've been focusing on either-ors in Christian theology and doctrine. And I want you to know, I don't think that's necessarily bad either. That helps us to clarify our positions. That helps us to gain understanding and theological acumen. It's fantastic. However, once you have gained that understanding, we should begin embracing the both ands in the Scriptures, because that is going to enable and empower us going forward. Okay, guys, so I just wanted to share that with you. Anthony Hoekema, great little work, created in God's image, and he just puts it so succinctly. If you want to go more in-depth into this topic, we have a few videos on this topic, so you can check out our channel. And then not only that, I would highly recommend James Anderson's work, Paradox in Christian Theology. Very, very important, I think, for the church going forward in our internet age. I appreciate all of you guys watching our channel here on YouTube. Appreciate all the love and support. Leave a comment if you're interested in me doing a video on any particular topic, whether it be related to Logos or perhaps just theology. If you want me to review a book or something like that, we do appreciate all your engagement and support. Check out our Patreon. Please like and subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you guys real soon. Take care. God bless. Bye now.